Okay, so we're going to just go ahead and get started because we're going to run out of time. In fact, we're going to run out of time anyway, right, Ryan? Because there's too much
Yeah,
to
we've got a
talk
lot to talk
about here.
about.
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce my guest, and anybody who comes late just is going to miss out on this intriguing person's bio here. Ryan Sedgeley and I are friends now, and we met through the Colorado Wolf Reintroduction Project and the Endangered Species Coalition, which we're both a little bit active in. I'm a little bit active. Ryan's really active. So Ryan holds a JD and a master's in environment and natural resources from the University of Wyoming, our neighbor to the north. Before becoming one of Colorado's most visible wolf advocates, he spent nearly a decade living among wolves, grizzlies, and bison in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, along with his wife, Nicole, who is a National Park Service Ranger. He's also worked at the South Pole, earning a Congressional Antarctic Service Medal. How many people can you say that about? He produced the 20-minute film Welcome Home, which won Best Conservation Film at the Portland Eco Film Festival last year. Ryan lives in Montrose on Colorado's western slope in the heart of wolf country. Ryan has built his life around the animals he's trying to protect. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be here.
It's good to have you and to talk to people about this. And we've got some nice comments in here. Hello from Substack. I always look for new cool people to subscribe to. Yay!
Awesome.
And David, poor wolves. China and Europe exterminated their wolves. Yes, yes. So let's don't do that here.
No.
No, so I'm going to start with a little bit of how I got personally involved with wolves, and then I'm going to ask Ryan to tell you about his experience living among them. Oh, Tracy says join link worked for me, but then had to additionally sign in to join the chat. Okay, so that could be slowing people up. So I used to be a volunteer firefighter when I lived in the northern mountains of Colorado. And because I was the smallest and at times the only woman on the team, when we had a car versus a mountain lion, moose, bear, anything, I was always the person who had to wait with the injured animal until the Division of Wildlife people showed up to pick the animal up, either to dispose of its remains or to take it to rehabilitation through DFW's rehab services. So I got to know all the Division of Wildlife people. And I happen to be an author who writes about a character who is a wolf. Other characters too, two-legged ones, but everybody loves the wolf best. And when wolf hybrid that I had passed away, I have a big following around the world who love wolves. And a woman reached out to me from a wolf sanctuary in Texas and said, you know, we had an unplanned birth. We have two wolves that we can't do anything with, and we're gonna have to put them down. We can't feed them. We can't afford to neuter and spay, and we just don't have the budget. And so I talked to my Division of Wildlife people and got a license to have a single animal sanctuary. And I got started rescuing wolf hybrids who are very often euthanized. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that there even are wolf hybrids in sanctuaries, but it's more unfortunate that they can't afford to spay and neuter, or aren't watching that in a timely way, don't have the personnel. And so I have serially adopted and rescued together with my husband 4 wolf cubs and raised them. And so they have my heart. We live like a pack. And that's how I got involved with and learned about Ryan. So Ryan, I want to ask you, what did you learn about wolves by actually living alongside them that you couldn't have learned any other way?
Yeah, I mean, there's no replacement to living with something. I was born in the suburbs of Denver, and so went to Yellowstone completely naive to what it was like to live with wolves, grizzly, bison, in a completely intact North American ecosystem. And ultimately, it's about learning those animals over time, learning what they do, what they don't do. And in the case of, being new, new things can be scary. And over time, learning that they're not scary, especially wolves. There's really nothing to be scared of. And in fact, it was a beautiful relationship. The other thing that I learned is that you rarely see them. In my 10 years there, unless you really went to, the Lamar to go find them specifically. I think I saw wolves there maybe 3 times, maybe four. What was cool is they were all very close encounters, but yeah, I mean that just goes to show that they want to be on their own, and it was just so neat to hear them in the area and to know that they were present. You'd hear them howling off in the distance at times, and it's a really cool experience.
Yeah, and you've talked about how their presence in the park, even when you didn't see them, made it such a richer experience.
Yeah, in our film, Doug Smith talks about how, an ecosystem without wolves is just kind of boring. And I got to agree, when I came back down to Colorado where I grew up, it did feel a little boring, a little empty. There's a little hole here when there's no wolves, when there's no grizzly bears and bison, that make up this really important part of the web of life. And so I wholeheartedly agree with him on that. Yeah, it's really exciting to see and hear that wolves are back in the area. Even if you don't see them, it just feels a little more complete.
So I have to ask, when was that moment when you knew that this was going to become your life's work? Do you
Well,
recall? Did something happen, or did it grow over time, or?
I think it grew over time. My background's really more in like political theory and law and history. And then when I met my wife, who is a wildlife biologist, and she got me going up to live with her in Yellowstone. Over time, she got me very interested in wildlife, and I became a bit of an amateur biologist, nature lover with her. Not that I didn't love nature before, but it was a level of intensity and depth that I had never experienced. And of course, when you live in the park, that's all anybody ever talks about, and so that just becomes your life. And so over that time, really came to understand and love it, and love wildlife so much. Yeah, although I will say when I lived on the coast of Oregon, we lived off grid, and I was in, basically homesteading, doing permaculture and natural building. I really grew my first intense relationship with a landscape, and that really opened the door for finding out later that I'm really into wildlife.
Yeah, I think that's what happened to us too. My husband and I were met and lived in Kansas City. We were both working there, and we moved west, and we started in Taos, New Mexico, which is really a wild place.
Yeah.
But then, because of work, we moved to Colorado. But living in the northern mountains in a really rustic cabin, you just live next to nature, and
Mhm.
the animals become the scenery. I mean, the heck with television, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Who's grazing on the front meadow today? So
Uh-huh.
we have a lot of comments from people here. We're watching you. We're looking at what you're saying. I want to move into the Colorado Wolf Reintroduction Project and what's happening now. How did this project come about? Whose idea was it? What's going on at the moment? And we're going to have to get into the sad story of some things that have happened that, I mean, I think they were a bit foreseen, but there are things that we need to do to respond to events. So, Ryan, you
Mhm.
want to just sum it up for us? What's going on?
Yeah, so I mean, real quick, Proposition 114 was a ballot measure that was voted on in 2020. And the voters decided that, yeah, they wanted to have wolves restored in Colorado, which I look at as a moral value-based decision, which then set the wildlife agency, the biologists, the experts into motion to then carry it out using science. You'll often hear people say ballot box biology or whatnot, and it's just a misleading lie, honestly, because the voters did not say how to do it or any of that nature. They just said that it needs to be done, that there's an empty spot in our ecosystem. which even the best science will say, yeah, it's good to have a fully intact ecosystem. Predator plays an important role. So then there were several years of stakeholder meetings, and various people from different stakeholders, from the livestock industry to animal advocates to sports people, all got together and developed a management plan that went through CPW, and they released this management plan. And we had another group that was a technical working group, which had the best minds in wolf restoration. I mean, it's a who's who. And they made suggestions and reviewed information as the management plan was being put together. And after that was all done and all completed and approved, the state of Colorado went and collected their first wolves from Oregon and released them. And since then, we've had one other capture and release from up in Canada, which is great. Those wolves up there have never seen people. They're fully their wolfy selves out there, and so they're great to have. Yeah, but yeah, and so sadly, since then, there's been a lot of opposition, primarily from the livestock industry, and from the hunting industrial complex too. And I want to be clear, it's not all ranchers, it's not all hunters and whatnot, but those industries are pushing back really hard. They want to see the wolves extirpated again. And we fought them, and we won 3 times last year to stop their efforts to get a quote unquote pause. And they eventually ran to the federal government, begging, and they put a stop to reintroductions that were supposed to happen this winter. So we did not get another slug of wolves that we really needed.
So I'm going to try that share screen thing and see if we can, no, that's not what we want, right? And now I don't know there. So that didn't work. I was going to show you a picture of a wolf. So one thing that we need to talk about is what is happening when a wolf actually does kill a cow or a calf, usually a calf, right?
Yeah.
So there's this big talk about ranchers losing a lot of money, but in fact, they are reimbursed quite a large amount. So over $700,000 for 6 calves killed. Isn't that right?
I think it's actually 6 calves, but it is a pretty small number of confirmed killings by wolves. So the compensation program that Colorado has, which was required by the ballot measure, is really the most generous in the nation. It's incredibly generous. It's very it pays the market value of a animal that is killed by a wolf, and it also allows for a multiplier for basically for livestock that are suspected of being killed by a wolf. If you can basically say a wolf killed one livestock out on the range and there's other livestock dead at the same time, a rancher can claim all of those and make a pretty good amount of money off of it. And so what we've seen, unfortunately, there are a couple ranchers who I think have abused the system and are wanting to just try to bankrupt the fund so that the people who really need it aren't getting the money. And they have collected hundreds of thousands of dollars between 2 people, and it's really unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that the Wildlife Commission approved those payments. It was pretty absurd and egregious on its face. So that was unfortunate and it set a bad precedent. But the compensation program still stands, and others have been compensated correctly, and will be happening in the future. Of course, we're trying to avoid needing the compensation plan at all, because if you do the right preventative conflict mitigation measures, you just never have those depredations, and you avoid needing that altogether. Generally speaking, I mean, you're always going to get some losses here and there, but That's really the way to go about it.
I entered some data in the chat for anybody that wants to know, but farmers and ranchers lose 9 times more cattle and sheep to health, weather, birthing, and theft than to all predators combined: mountain lions, coyotes, wolves, right?
Yep, less than 1% of all losses can be attributed to all mammalian and avian predators. And wolves themselves are about less than 1%, but it depends on which data set you look at, but about 0.02%. It's really basically nothing. And some ranchers will actually be impacted disproportionately. So that's where it becomes important to have a little nuance and understand that, hey, while the numbers are incredibly tiny, why are we even talking about this in the big picture? Someone might experience more losses acutely. And so that's why the compensation program exists in the way it does, to make them whole, and reduce, conflict and resistance. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's a tiny, tiny amount.
I think we're not looking at what happens to ranchers because of overgrazing by elk and deer too. I mean, the presence of an apex predator in the ecosystem balances it and also brings back riparian areas and small mammals, even birds, types of
Yeah.
trees, the diversity of plant life because of the elimination of elk and deer overgrazing and overpopulation. And how we handle that right now in Colorado is with sharpshooters from helicopters calling diseased elk herds that develop chronic wasting disease.
Yeah.
Wolves would take care of that naturally, and the elk herds would be healthier for hunters, right? Because hunting is still a big part of Colorado's
It is.
economy.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
then, what's interesting is that wolves will get elk moving through the landscape. And that's what does get elk off of, say, people's alfalfa fields, which cost ranchers far more in damages than wolves would ever do. But it gets them moving through the landscape, which is important not only for preventing, damage to crops, but like you said, preventing overgrazing, damage to ecosystems, waterways, and spreading chronic wasting disease, because that's a disease that is spread through saliva. And so when they're all hanging out together and eating off the same ground, those prions just get passed to each one of them, and it's really a terrible, unhealthy situation. It does lead to a situation though where hunters can sometimes think that there are no wool or no elk anymore because they're moving. They're not just out in a valley anymore. You've got to go find them, and so they can lead to this perception that the elk are all gone, and that's just not true. Up in Montana and Idaho, or wolves have existed for decades now. There's more elk than there ever has been. So when you hear that, no, that ain't right.
so I want to just mention that I think farmers are losing a lot of money. Do you have any idea how much money they're losing from elk overpopulation?
I don't have a specific number. I know in our film that Ty Jacober, who is now a Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commissioner, his ranch, he said that he loses about $75,000 of hay every year to elk. So I mean, that just right there shows you, yeah, that's a lot of money that they're losing. Yeah, and not only would a rancher never lose that kind of those numbers of calves, then predation just wouldn't even get close to that.
So I mean, every politician that runs for office in Colorado speaks to the farmers, especially in Colorado's districts 3 and 4, which are large and
Mhm,
rural
mhm,
and
mhm,
varied landscape. And so there's this, oh, we're all for the farmers, we're all for the farmers. But then
mhm.
there's opposition to the wolves by one of our representatives in Congress, Lauren Boebert.
Oh
So I
yeah.
want to talk about her attack on the Environmental Species Act, Endangered Species Act. Can you talk to me just for a minute about this bill and what a ridiculous name it has?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, Representative Boebert is a notorious, I'll say, representative. Not Colorado's finest. But yes,
No.
she really hates wolves, and I will say that Representative Jeff Hurd over here in CD3 has also been going along with being anti-wolf as well. But the very misleading title, the Pet and Livestock Protection Act, would basically delist wolves. It would tell the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to ignore any science and just delist them. And they did this up in the Northern Rockies too. And so that's what they're trying to do, but they're trying to do it nationwide. And then they're trying to remove judicial review. So they're telling people that, oh, and you cannot seek recourse in the courts as well. So it's really not only just an absurd violation of science and best practices and principles of ecosystems. It's also a violation of the separation of powers and due process that people should have. So
Yeah, and
it's no surprise.
I want to go into further detail about this judicial review. I think it prevents going back and changing it if there's a change of heart or mind or a negative result if this bill passes. We can't then go to court and
Correct.
undo, right? I mean, it's just there.
Yeah, yeah. So, this decision. So what it directs the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to do is basically have a finding that that these the gray wolf wouldn't need to be protected anymore, and then that's that, and that's their finding, and that's their agency action. Which in general, there is the ability to then sue the agency for things that they've done wrong or are not in compliance with existing law. And so it just takes any review, anything out of your hands. And so there's no recourse. It's just heavy-handed, federal, um, you know, um, imposition on what should be something that science is managing through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which in another way is kind of ironic given many of the anti-federal government positions that people like Lauren Boebert hold.
So I would go further. I think we should call it a legislative assault. I mean, we have Congress people there whose jobs are to make life better for Americans. And Boebert has decided and said aloud that wolf pups should be made into fuzzy little hats. I mean, her hatred for wildlife is just kind of unrivaled, but she's not alone. And I just really think this is an assault. I mean, and using the no legal recourse loophole that she's put in, she and other sponsors in this act is frightening. It's just frightening. It's such overreach on their part.
Yeah, it
So
really is. Um, Yeah, it's truly it is an outrageous attack on wildlife and wolves in particular. And there are plenty of other people, you're right, that support this kind of thing. Being up in Wyoming for so long, there were a number of federal delegation members there that were in the same boat. And I think a lot of them are pandering to kind of a cultural hatred of wolves. They're amongst livestock industry and farming communities, people have this misperception about what wolves are and what they do, and there is this kind of deep-seated cultural hatred of wolves that is detached from any of the actual impacts any of them would ever feel from wolves. And so I've said many times that the controversy and conflicts over wolves has absolutely nothing to do with wolves, but it has everything to do with settler colonialism and power and control over both the landscape of ecosystems and indigenous people. And so I think that's where the real conflict is. Even if people aren't aware of that, I think that's the deep-seated root of the controversy and conflict. And we're not going to move past this unless we start addressing those issues and really heal our relationships, within ourselves, within the natural world, and with indigenous peoples. And I think there's a lot to be healed there, and a lot of positive outcomes that can come from doing that.
Well, I'm going to insert a plug for my next guest here because this actually is relevant. So, our Colorado State Attorney General is going to be my guest in 2 weeks on the Substack Live channel. And we're going to talk about wildlife and the environment. And I have to kind of push Phil Weiser to do that a little bit. That's
Yeah.
not always his highest priority. However, I will say this: he has sued the Trump administration 60 times as
Mm.
Attorney General. And I do think he will stand up and fight for Coloradans if he becomes governor. But one reason I brought that up here is because even if wolves are federally delisted, Colorado state law still protects them, right?
Yeah, it does. And so if they federally delisted them, that would give Colorado the opportunity to protect them under our state Endangered Species Act. Um, so that actually, in some ways, could be a preferred outcome to then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service simply removing the 10J memo and taking over management, which is really weird to say. It's like, well, delisting might actually be a better option here because we could protect them. Whereas if it stays within the federal government's oversight, um, they can do all kinds of things, including just not enforcing poaching law, poaching violators. And very quickly, you could just see wolves disappear without any kind of recourse because they're totally in control. So that is a possibility. It's also, something we're watching very closely because we don't want to see that. And given the attacks on our wolf restoration program from Department of Interior and Doug Burgum, it's very concerning. We're keeping our eyes on that, and it's also concerning that Colorado's governor and Colorado Parks and Wildlife has decided not to push back in any meaningful way.
Yeah, and I'm just going to insert another little thing here, like I did about Bobard with the hats. And Senator Bennett, in a Durango Herald interview, suggested that we pause the wolf reintroduction project in Colorado, which wouldn't that just leave the existing wolves that are left to die?
Well, first of all, he doesn't have the legal authority to do that,
Thank
which
you
is,
for that.
yeah, which is an interesting point. It's like, okay, so you don't know what you're talking about with this. What it tells me is that one, he doesn't know what he's talking about on that specific issue, and when he comes over to the Western Slope, which many politicians like him do, they come over and they hear from a handful of groups that they think represents the entire Western Slope. And I can tell you by what he said, he sat down and talked with people from the hunting industrial complex and the livestock associations, and they told him the sky is falling, we need the pause, all the stuff, bad stuff is happening. And he just probably looked at that and said, oh, this is what all of the Western Slope thinks. And it's really a misnomer. It's amazing how incorrect I think that perspective is. Most people on the Western Slope, they live in cities and towns and have town jobs and city concerns. Um, the ranching farming world is actually not as big as it gets like talked about. There's a culture of agriculture out here, and it's important, don't get me wrong, but it's not this like economic powerhouse. It's not the main driver of our economies out here. And so it's interesting how they continue though to have this outsized presence both at the state capitol and with our politicians that go to
Lobbyists.
DC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our senators are not taking good care of us, but I do want to mention one thing that is a very big component of Colorado's economic engine, and that is tourism.
Oh yeah.
People come here for the wild, for the nature, for the beauty. They want to ski, they want to bike, they want to hike, they want to fly fish, they want to hunt. They just want to be in the mountains and be in the beautiful areas that we preserve so well. And I think
Yeah.
that the fact that wolves are part of the ecosystem here is also a big draw. I mean, look at the crowds that appear when there's a wolf sighting in Yellowstone. I mean, people really want to see the natural environment. I think it would benefit the engine of the economy to have some healthy wolf packs.
I agree. And I think, if it ends up being where there are specific valleys or places where the wolves tend to congregate, and we'll see what they end up doing. But if we get a situation like we have up in Yellowstone, where you have like the Lamar Valley, where wolves can be fairly regularly seen, that could be a huge draw for people to come see them. And I've actually proposed and created a plan that would create a wolf town, Colorado, really trying to get one of these rural towns that meet a few criteria where they could really brand themselves as kind of a gateway to wolf tourism. So I think that's a fun idea, but yeah, I think
Yeah,
it
and I
could be a
mean,
real help.
just think how that could be the driver of a greater economy, health in some small county, in the
Absolutely.
mountains, to have a wolf
Mhm.
town like that, to have a
Yeah.
gateway to viewing wolves and so on. I mean, that
Right.
people are thinking, oh, ranchers are losing a little money, but Colorado's also losing a lot of money the more we endanger the environment from a healthy
Yeah.
ecosystem to a development dominated one. And believe it or
Right.
not, ranching is development. I mean, the cattle
Yeah.
lobby is huge development.
Mhm.
So, we're not like the flats of Nebraska and Kansas where there are feedlots and lots of cattle. I mean, we need to weigh what we have to offer for economic engines, and our pristine environment is one of those things. So, I just have one more thing to say on this really sort of legislative and dark topic here, and that is that our senators are not serving us well. Hickenlooper is a sponsor of the Fix Our Forests Act. He's a sponsor of it. And this bill does exactly the opposite of what its name is. It doesn't fix our forests, it permits logging. And logging just inundates an environment. And not just for wolves, but for all wildlife. And I'm talking plant and tree species as well. Do you want to speak to that just briefly?
Yeah, I will. It's been really frustrating that someone who says that he cares so much about wildlife and our mountains and ecosystems, that he's pushing this bill, he's sponsoring it and trying to make it seem like this is a good thing. And it's truly just a destructive handout to the logging industry. And yeah, you're right. It won't really affect fires, or prevent fires, I should say. There's some evidence saying that it might actually increase fire danger by thinning it out. You'll dry out the forest floor more, and making fires easier to burn. And when you have logging roads, those are really destructive and interrupt wildlife and all kinds of things. It's it's such a disingenuous bill, and it is deeply frustrating that no matter how much heat he seems to take on this, he is just like, nope, nope, I am going to push this. We're going to pass this. Um, and it makes no sense. It feels like a real like stab in the back, for someone who, again, professes to care about this stuff so much. Um, yeah, and it leaves ugly, scarred mountainsides. And the other thing is, as we're dealing with climate change, our landscape is drying out. It's getting hotter and drier. And one of the worries is that, what do we start seeing, desertification and trees that don't grow back. And I think there's just so much going on right now that to wholesale log areas is just reckless, on so many levels. And yeah, and sometimes fires do happen. Fire regimes are essentially a natural part. And granted, some of these fires have gotten a lot bigger and more intense, because of forest mismanagement for a long time, because we didn't let fires burn, and also because it's becoming hotter and drier. But we got to be really careful when we do stuff like this, because there might not be a future for these forests in the same way if we start logging them. Yeah, we just got to be really careful with climate change. One of the things I worry about happening this summer, which is looking like it might be a doozy for fire, given that we have 80-degree
It's
temperatures
already
mid-March.
summer and we didn't have winter.
Yeah, I know, and our winter. Yeah, that once we start having fires burning, all of a sudden these senators who want to pass this bill are going to start going, see, we told you, and now we need to pass this so we can protect us from fire in the future. And I think that's probably what we'll see, is they'll use that crises and emergency to pass this very disingenuously named bill.
Yeah,
So we need to be on the lookout for that.
I'm a former wildland firefighter, and I can tell you that logging does not prevent wildfires. What grows back is usually one or possibly two species of trees instead of a rich forest with some that reduce and retard fire, and some that actually their cones are enlivened by fire to grow. So logging prevents all of that, and we're down to the problem that causes pine beetles. So we won't get into that because that's a whole nother subject. But just let me say, logging does not prevent wildfires. This is
No,
a
no.
gal who has some wildfire experience talking. I'd
And those
also like to
serotinous cones are so
mention,
cool.
and this is a segue. This is not Ryan's point of view, but I had the opportunity to spend some time with a candidate who is running against John Hickenlooper named Julie Gonzalez, and she is very pro environment, pro the ecology in Colorado, and maybe look into her if you're thinking about voting in that Senate race. So let's talk about just one more thing, and then we'll move on to what
Yeah.
people can do. You touched on it, but we didn't really dig deep. The
Hmm.
underlying issue about life and the ecology in Colorado and throughout the West is water. We have a beautiful big river, the Colorado River, that feeds and sustains 7 states in the West. And it is down to appallingly low levels because of heat, wind, dryness, and agriculture. And this feeds into the whole issue of endangered species, the ecology, the engine of Colorado's economy, and life itself. Agriculture in the West is nourished by the Colorado River. All those crops grown in Arizona and parts of New Mexico, and especially in California that we eat, are watered by the Colorado River. What is the Endangered Species Coalition thinking about messaging here? How are we talking to people about the issue of water?
Yeah, certainly it's an issue that comes up, especially now as we're dealing with drought, this mega drought, and the crises that we're already looking at this summer. And one of the big impacts that we see are to stream flows. And when you have this fast runoff real early in the spring, you start getting low water levels, and the water starts getting warmer. And a lot of our native fish are fish that have adapted to cold water. And so it could really put endangered fish at risk as warm water fish start moving up the streams and waterways, and threatening the native fish here. And so it's really concerning from an aquatic perspective. And then of course all the wildlife, they rely on these streams and creeks and waters to survive, and so do all the plants and everything that keeps it up. And so, yeah, we are going to be facing some major questions, and there are no easy answers. This is an incredibly difficult conversation that we're having about water in the West, and I do not think we can have that conversation and make any real progress on this unless we address two things, really. One is the water rights system that generally exists in the West, which is something called the prior appropriation water rights system. So that just means if you were there first and you claim that water, you get that water before anybody else, and you get that amount of water. And so what that ends up leading to is you have these oftentimes it's agricultural folks, and they have a big allotment of water. And so even if they're not actually using it, they'll just spill the water out onto the land, because if they don't use it, then they lose that water right, or that portion of the water, and others can claim it. And so it's a system that was based on mining and settler, colonialism, and it just has no place in a modern, system where you have this river that is so crucial to so many states. So I don't think we're going to get anywhere unless we talk about that and probably get rid of that or strictly reform it to more of a permitted best use kind of situation. And that's going to be hard. That's going to be a really hard conversation, because people will fight that tooth and nail out here. And with that, we got to ask the questions of what is appropriate water use in the arid West, especially as things continue to get drier. I think we got to really look at some different solutions. And also, I think it's worth being fair and trying to find ways for these people to transition to another way of life. Because it's, regardless of where and how people got to their positions, how we act, I think really matters. And so helping those people make that bridge to another livelihood is important. And then the other side of having this conversation, besides water rights, um, is addressing ag. When you look at the Rio Grande River Basin, 70% of the water is used for growing alfalfa. And this is generally for pet horses, and a lot of it gets shipped overseas to places like Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
That is a huge amount of water being used for that. And is that really appropriate? And should we really be putting the blame on cities and municipalities when the amount of water they're using is only a tiny fraction of the whole? I think those are some real questions we got to talk about. And again, it ain't going to be easy.
No, it isn't. But I think it's going to get more and more critical, and maybe to the point where people are willing to talk about it
Yeah.
and really address
Mhm.
it. Because we're going to have to divide it up. We're going to have to think about what we need to
Yeah.
drink. And,
Mhm.
changing watering lawn patterns is not enough. I mean,
It's not.
we're gonna have to get into serious water users
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
say, how much do you really need? And how many do you really feed with
Right.
this, and that the Saudi Arabian horse thing is just right on the money as in terms of what's happening to a lot of the water. So we've
Yeah.
talked about some of the, federal onslaught against the Endangered Species Act, and we've talked about wolves and we've talked about water. Let's talk about what we can do. Let's talk about what we can do, beginning with wolves. And I want to say that you can buy a Born to Be Wild license plate in Colorado
Yeah.
and do a lot of good. It directly funds non-lethal coexistence for wolves. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the Born to Be Wild license plate was a product of the Rocky Mountain Wolf Foundation. They came up with this idea for, let's get a license plate out there, a specialty plate that will help pay for mitigating conflict between ranchers and wolves. It's a beautiful license plate. It's got a wolf on it, and it's black and white with a beautiful set of mountains and stars and galaxy or Milky Way above it. So it's really cool. It's got Born to Be Wild written on it. Um, and yeah, that money goes straight towards helping people. And so when especially over here you hear people say like, oh well, the people over in the city, voted for this and forced it on all of us, and they're not going to do anything. It's a real pushback to say, yeah, no, that's not true. This is people
Right.
putting their own money into this.
Yeah.
And I think close to $2 million has been raised so far. And last
Oh,
I checked, it was
wow.
like 16 or 18,000 license plates sold. So it's popular. It's very cool. And in fact, Endangered Species Coalition actually won a grant from Colorado Parks and Wildlife to promote the license plate. And so we're going to have this really cool truck that's going to have custom graphics on it. We got really neat handouts and things that we're going to be taking around the state and events. So keep your eyes open for that this summer.
Yeah. Oh, that's a wonderful idea. And I want our crew to come and film some of that when you're out in the wild with Born to Be Wild. I think it's the coolest looking license plate I've ever seen. Absolutely the coolest. Wait, do you have one? Show everyone. It's such a cool plate. And the
So
fact
this
that
is this is the promotional
yeah,
license plate, but that's what it looks like.
yeah, that
Yeah,
is
it's
wonderful. Come
beautiful.
on, everybody get
Yeah.
one. Everybody get one. Also, what about, can we communicate to the Colorado Wildlife Commission and support the citizens petition for rulemaking to amend the composition program? What can we do there?
Yeah, so there's a citizens petition for rulemaking that the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission is going to be considering in May. And what this does is a citizens petition is basically any citizen or groups of people or organizations can make a request to the Wildlife Commission to say, hey, we think rulemaking is needed about this subject. Will you consider making rules in generally in what we're looking to do? The commission has the latitude to say, yes, we'll do that, or no. And we are hoping that they will say yes to this. The wolf management plan has always been considered what's called an adaptive management plan. So as you go along, you learn, you see what's happening, and then you make changes. And so that's what this is seeking to do. It's seeking to kind of patch some holes and some loopholes and things that are not working in the compensation program, and make it so that you have less, that kind of make it less easy to fraudulently make claims, abuse of the system, so that it's more responsive. Taking better care for the taxpayers and their money that's going into this, and making sure the long term existence of this fund continues, so that the people who really need it will be able to get that money. Because as advocates, we really want this program to work. We want it to be there. We want it to be funded, because it's a critical element to what we're doing. So it's really pretty minimal regulatory changes. They do have a little bit of bite in certain places, but it's not this overarching big, it's going to change everything, it's going to put all the ranchers out of business. I mean, there's a lot of sky is falling talk around anything with wolves, but this one is not that. These are some pretty small tweaks, and we actually a whole bunch of people worked on this, including some livestock operators, and so we think it's very fair and very reasonable changes. And so if you'd like to support that, you can email the wildlife commissioners and ask them to approve the citizens petition for rulemaking for the wolf compensation plan. And you can subscribe to our emails, and we'll be having action alerts coming out that'll make that easier for you as well.
Yeah, and I want to say that we actually have the names of the current commissioners and their emails. And so we will put that in the show notes when this is produced as a video. So watch for that. Also, there's other things you can do that we're going to tell you about there, and who to contact, and ideas that you might want to explore. But what if people want to support the Endangered Species Coalition? How can they do that?
Yeah, the best way to do it is to visit our website, which is endangered.org. And there you can learn about all of our work. You can make donations on our website and support us financially. None of this happens without support of people who donate, and that goes a long ways towards helping the work in Colorado and frankly around the country to protect our endangered species, and the Endangered Species Act itself. We have people in DC that are working day in and day out to find these attacks and fight them. So that's probably the best ways. And then, participate in our action alerts, reach out to your senators and representatives, and submit comments on regulatory proposals. And if you get our emails, you'll get action alerts, and we make it real easy for you to participate in that process.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's important to do is, this is an election cycle. We are getting ready to either reelect or replace Hickenlooper, who is one of the sponsors of the Fix Our Forests Act. Maybe consider that as you get ready to cast your vote. We can talk to the competitor and make sure that we're voting for someone who is in fact going to preserve endangered species, fight for the Endangered Species Act, and preserve wildlife and wild places in Colorado, which I have to say, in my opinion, neither of our senators are doing a good job of. So we're going to have all sorts of stuff for you in the chat. We have a really neat note here. Somebody said, rethink the wolf. What did you say? Please keep this interview going. Just share it to thousands. Come on. Hey, everybody, if you'll hit the heart, other people will see this too. So keep hitting that heart. I want to talk about sort of an emotional beat here, because we've talked a lot about what's going wrong, what we're up against, who's doing bad things, what's happening. I first want to start with what is happening to the wolves that have been reintroduced to Colorado. And then I want to talk about what we can do in terms of just looking at a different mindset about them.
Yeah, so the wolves that have been brought here, a number of them have formed packs, which is really exciting. It's not all bad. It's not all conflict. We've had successful pups born every year now, and that's really exciting. That's encouraging. It means that the wolves will do fine here if we let them. It's really a matter of, will humans let them thrive? Because if we do, they'll do great, and so that's really positive. We know that they'll live here and do well. And in some areas, they've been doing better than others. There have been some spots where there's been a lot of conflict, and unfortunately, with any kind of reintroduction of a species, you're going to lose a certain number of them. It's just kind of part of the deal. And wolves are not the best hunters. Hunting is pretty dangerous for them. And so whether it's hunting or disease or other wildlife, they do die. And it's hard to hear and see that, especially given how much money is invested in all of them, each one of them. But there's natural death that is expected. But then there's also human caused death, and there's several categories of that. One are things like accidental killings. That's the kind of situation where, a car hits one. It's not great, but it happens, and you can't really generally put a driver to blame on that. It just happens for all wildlife, and that's another conversation about cars. But so you have deaths for that, which is often called incidental take. And then you have people who are poaching these wolves and are shooting them with malicious intent to try to kill them off. That is not only a crime, not only a federal crime, it's a state crime. And it is really spitting in the face of the entire, people of Colorado ultimately who voted for this. And then you have situations, which is even more unfortunate, where the wildlife agency will kill wolves that are considered chronic depredators, excuse me. And, the way that the rule is set up right now, it's basically almost like a 3 strikes rule. And if they kill, or attack livestock 3 times, then the agency can basically go out and shoot that wolf. We think that that's unfair in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are going to be times when that might be necessary. I think almost the grand majority of time, we know that killing wolves doesn't work. It often makes problems worse, especially when you kill particular wolves that would be teaching their young how to hunt. It really does cause problems to kill wolves, and so I think there have been a number of times where the agency has killed wolves that it was unnecessary, and it was more about placating, an angry rancher or two or an industry, than really doing much good. And so I think as we move forward, we need to really think about how the agency is handling this, and maybe revisit that chronic depredation rule and what that means, and really, I think both with our reg requests and our citizens petition, a big part of that is putting in a duty to mitigate harm. All the other wildlife compensation programs require it. You can't get a claim unless you tried to stop the harm. And so that needs to be a part of this compensation program too. And I think killing any wolves from the agency needs to be the same way. Did the livestock producer, did they try to stop their livestock from getting killed? Because if they didn't, then they're just not tending their valuable goods ultimately, and no other business gets that wonderful luxury. I make jewelry, and if I left my gemstones out on the sidewalk and walked away and came back 2 months later and they were gone, like, I'm not going to be able to go back to the government and say, well, you got to pay me for that. It's yeah. So I think there's a very reasonable request to try to mitigate that harm.
Well, I want to turn to something that I've really been just eager to ask you. But first, I want to touch on the film that you made.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a place where people can see this online? Can you put it in the chat?
I don't think I have access to a chat.
Well,
Oh,
see
there it
that.
is. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I just needed to open up my
Can
my
you
screen a little further. So,
also, I mean, I would like to do a screening for my friends and neighbors, and that's something other people could do too, because this film is really beautiful and it really celebrates wolves, and it might change hearts and minds better than us talking about our legislatures and who's making claims for cattle kills and all this other stuff. This film is really beautiful and it hits the heart. So people can sign up, can't they, to host a viewing?
Yeah, well, so the film is available on our website. You can watch it at any time you'd like. It's about 20 minutes. It is fun to watch it as a group. We've
Yeah,
done screenings all over the world with it, and it's a very moving film. In fact, I think
it
every
is.
screening I've seen, there's someone ends up crying at the end in good tears. It's a yeah, yeah, exactly. So, when you see that, it's just a really powerful film. And Alan Lacey of Real Earth Films did a amazing job making this film. Really beautiful. So yeah,
It
you
is.
can see it there. And if you'd like to put an event together, I'm always happy to help you with that. And I have information and a little bit of a toolkit that you can use to put your event together for screening it.
Well, thank you for that. So, Ryan, with everything that you've just talked about, the federal obstruction, the legislation, the mortality numbers, the
Mhm.
problems with implementation, what keeps you doing this work?
Yeah, it is it's tough work. And I think the thing that really keeps me going is reflecting on my time in Yellowstone and the beauty and the deep emotional connection of knowing a place like in your bones and feeling that and knowing what that is. I had one experience in particular that just I will always remember. We used to live at a place called Madison Junction, which is right where the Madison or the Firehole and Gibbon River come together and form the Madison. There's a little road that goes down to a bridge over the Gibbon River where we would walk our dog. And so my wife and I, we went for a walk one winter night, and it was just the most perfect scene. It was a full moon. There was snow covering the ground. It's just gorgeous. And as we came around the corner and down to the river, the valley had a beautiful fog across it. And then there were wolves that were a pack of wolves that were howling just up on the hill at a view.
Wow.
And it was just, you put the hair on the back of your neck, just so cool of an
I just got a
experience and
little
just to
chill.
know that. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really,
I
really
mean, it
cool.
sounds like your work is coming from your heart. And
Yes.
that's the way we feel about our love for wolves in Colorado too, and the little tiny bit of rescue that we are able to do. And there are people who really want to hunt and kill wolves, but the majority of Coloradans are really excited about their presence here. They
Yeah.
voted for them to come here. Wolves are native to Colorado. They were eliminated in the last century from the landscape, but this is their home. And I believe that they belong here. And I think they live on in our hearts, even when they haven't been here. And that those of us who have held on to them in our hearts are now advocating to let them live here again. So we want to make sure that everyone can support the Endangered Species Coalition. So could you put a URL in the chat so that people can go there and support the efforts that you're making?
Yeah,
And
there we go. And I've got a
thank you.
really cool video I'd like to share from Yellowstone if you're okay with me sharing this.
Oh
It's
yeah, absolutely. I'd love
okay.
that. Let's see if that works.
Yeah, it was an amazing video that we had wolves that were hunting bison and they came right across the road. It's a really cool video. So, yeah.
All right, I'm copying that now. And again, we're going to have all kinds of notes, show notes when we post this as a video. So look from there. There'll be things that you can do and things that you can see and places you can go on the web to support wolves. Thank you, Ryan, for being my guest. Thank
Thank you
you
for
all for
having me.
coming. We just love you. You've just been so supportive. I've loved all the comments in the chat. Remember, next time in 2 weeks, we're going to have someone who might be the next governor of Colorado, Phil Weiser, and we can ask him about whether he's going to protect the wolf reintroduction project in Colorado and support the climate and the economy. Thanks again, Ryan. You've been a wonderful guest.
Oh, thank you so much.
See you all at the next one. Thanks for coming. Bye.